Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bloomsbury Institute. I'm Nigel Newton of Bloomsbury, and we're delighted to see you all here, and most of all to welcome Khaled Hosseini back to England.
With And the Mountains Echoed, so what was your very first starting point with that?
The starting point with that book was an image. It really was. It was just almost like I've said before, like a thunderclap. It was this picture of a guy who's walking across a desert, and he's pulling one of those old radio flyer wagons, little red wagons with 4 wheels, and there's a little girl inside. She's about 3, and several paces behind them is a boy who's about 10, and they're walking in a desert, and it's just them, and there's mountains. And I don't know where they're going, why they're on the road, but something is there. And as I said before, it's a matter of just exploring and see why this thing is suddenly speaking to me and resonating. And so I just kind of sat down and kind of riffed with that image and that bond between Abdullah and Peri, the brother and the sister.
So you have the brother and the sister, but you also have 2 girls that are at the center of the book.
Yeah.
And perhaps you'd like to read very briefly from...
Yeah, this is a brief passage, so don't worry. And it's about 2 sisters. They're twins. One is quite beautiful and very sort of glamorous by Afghanistan. They're living in a village. She gets a lot of attention. The other one, the narrator, whose name is Parwana, the beautiful one's name is Masuma. Parwana is very she's plain looking, and she's very awkward, and she's shy, and painfully aware of how overshadowed she is by this beautiful creature that's her sister. And this passage is really about that. When the girls were 13, they sometimes went to the crowded bazaars of nearby towns for their mother. The smell of freshly sprayed water rose from the unpaved street. The 2 of them strolled down the lanes, past stalls that sold hookahs, silk shawls, copper pots, and old watches. Slaughtered chickens hung by their feet, tracing slow circles over hunks of lamb and beef. In every corridor, Parwana would see men's eyes snapping to attention when her sister Masuma passed by. She saw their efforts to behave matter-of-factly, but their gazes lingered, helpless to tear away. If Masuma glanced in their direction, they looked idiotically privileged. They imagined they had shared a moment with her. She interrupted conversations mid-sentence, smokers mid-drag. She was the trembler of knees, the spiller of teacups.
So we're going to go on to questions. We have a question from Australia. Do you find that you start writing a story with a plot and character in mind, but as you write, the plot and characters change into something else?
A resounding yes. My books always surprise me. I never, ever end up going where I think I was going to go. No character ends up behaving the way I thought they were going to behave.
There.
Does that work? Oh.
Okay.
You brought Afghan to us. What about bringing your experience of America to us?
Well, I think some of it is there to some extent in the Kite Runner and also in And the Mountains Echoed. I think the experience of people living in exile, I've written to some extent about. There's an entire chapter in this book about a guy he's a physician, he's Afghan, he is living in Northern California.
Who does that remind you of?
Yeah, and he has this very difficult relationship with regards to his roots. And he goes back to Afghanistan and has this very transformative, or he thinks, experience. And he comes back to the U.S. after this incredible emotional experience, and learns some troubling, difficult things about his own nature.
We have one here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm actually a student writing a dissertation with a special focus on your beautiful works.
Oh, thank you so much.
You said that your wife encouraged you to continue with writing The Kite Runner even after 9/11. And I remember reading somewhere that she quoted saying, in order to put a human face on the Afghan people. Has that desire continued to feed your need to write?
Well, I think there's a kind of a distinction that I have to make, and it may seem a little nitpicky, but to me it's a very important one. Even after what she said, that really wasn't my motivation, to be frank about it. Because I think that if your agenda is that, it's really a big thing. And it's far too onerous a weight to carry, to be sort of the face, the voice, and to put a human face. You know, I've always written for very simple reasons, in that there are characters, there are themes, there are ideas that really speak to me. You know, there's something about the experience of being human on this planet, you know, aspects of it that I find, you know, irresistible and very moving, and I want to write about those things. I've never tried to educate anybody about Afghanistan, because I think the moment that becomes sort of the engine that propels you, then your writing becomes very agenda-driven, and then it's tainted, because then you have an audience in mind. And I really believe that every writer should have an audience of just themselves. And all the books I've written have been for me. But books serve a purpose far beyond what the writer intended. And I realize that for many people in the West, certainly in the US, my books are sort of a window into Afghan culture, Afghan life, history, and so on. And although that's not my intention, I am pleased by that. And people write to me and say, you know, I just thought this of Afghanistan, and I read your books, and now I see how similar my life is in weird ways with people there, and my hopes and aspirations are the same.
We're running out of time, so I'm going to take one here, one up there, and then finish with one there. So do you want to go?
The freedoms and the peace that you and your parents enjoyed when you were little in Afghanistan, do you believe that it would ever come back to the Afghan peoples? Or?
Well, you know, they will come back to a certain segment of the Afghan people, but they were never really there for everybody to begin with. Even in the so-called golden era, you know, in those years, if you went to a village outside of Kandahar, it might as well have been, you know, 1999. I mean, things have been that the Taliban did not bring this brand new radical ideology. You know, they kind of tapped into an existing ideology already. And so this entire parts of Afghanistan where life has been very difficult for groups like women, you know, and that's just been the way it's been. But what the Taliban did that was quite dramatic is that they transferred that to places like Kabul, which was traditionally very progressive and far more liberal and accepting of you know, people's differences. And then suddenly those urban, professional, educated women had to live like the women in the village outside of Kandahar, and that was very difficult for them to accept. And those were the women who became very vocal. Those are the women whose stories we heard a lot.
Up here?
I was wondering if there are any authors that you are particularly influenced by.
No, I mean, there's authors that I really admire, but I feel like I've reached that point where when I sit, I sound like myself, and there's a voice in my head that I recognize, and there's a sort of a rhythm and a tempo and a cadence, and a set of limitations that I've accepted over the years, and a set of things that I feel I can do well, which I've also accepted over the years. And so I'm able to read other people now when I'm writing without subconsciously imitating them the next morning, which, you know, which is, you know, I'm happy about. So, you know, I admire a lot of writers. I think I've learned something from every author I've read, but I'm not aware, at least consciously, that I've really been, you know, inspired or tried to emulate anyone.
Okay, I think this is the moment to end, which is really on the rhythm and the cadence and the voice of Khaled Hosseini.
Oh, thank you.
You so much
it was
for
fun.
being with us
Thanks
tonight.
so much. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much.